Hi everyone, welcome back to the table. I'm Scott. So this is meant to be an all-inclusive guide on how to get started with 3D printing. I think the best place to start off with is, what is 3D printing? In simple terms, you're creating real-life objects from 3D models generated on the computer. There are a few different kinds of 3D printers. Largely, they're put into two categories, SLA and FDM. Both of these are better at doing different things. FDM uses filament typically on a roll which feeds into a high temperature extruder, sometimes called a hot end, and places material on a bed layer by layer. SLA uses lasers which project an image onto the bottom of a bath of resin, and this adheres to a plate that continually moves up. FDM printing is cheaper and easier to get into. It's less expensive and typically requires little to no post-processing work, and that means work that you have to do after the print is complete. Printing small miniatures for a tabletop game would not work really well. However, printing terrain, larger figures, or just general parts that are larger in size works really well. FDM printing also has its print head move back and forth for every single layer that it needs to do. This means that the more things you try to print at once, the longer it's going to take for the print. Now, one of the most common 3D printers that are out there on the market right now for FDM printing is an Ender 3. This is a very good entry-level printer. Easy to set up, easy to use, and most importantly has a wide range of support. The price for these range from $150 to $250. I myself have been eyeing an Ender 3 version 3 for a little while now. It has a couple neat features such as auto bed leveling. I have a link down below if you want to go check that out. You don't need a whole lot to be able to print. Really, all you need is filament. Everything else typically comes in the box. Depending on the printer you get, you can also buy upgrades such as converting over your plastic extruder to a metal one, which is very common for the older versions. The newer versions typically have these things already, but there's a whole market of upgrades that you can get for your printer. However, if you're just getting started, I recommend keeping things simple and just using what's out of the box first. See what you like, what you don't like, and then start improving later. Now, there are some nicer printers out in the market. Prusa is a really good example of one. However, these start at about $800. Now, I've used a few of these in the past, both in work and at home, and they are fantastic printers. These things have some really nice features and make printing very easy and very consistent. I put a link down below to the site if you want to go ahead and check that out. SLA printing is fantastic at printing detailed models and takes less time to print as it prints all the layers at the same time on the plate. What determines how long it takes is the height of the tallest model at the time. So if all your models were the same height, if you printed 1 or 10, it would take the same amount of time. However, SLA printing is more expensive, requires a bit more post-processing work, and is stinky. So I'd recommend this printer if you're planning on printing a lot of figures and models. Maybe you play D&D and you want to print some miniatures for your game. You're really into tabletop war games. You want to modify your models. Printing those small details, that's exactly what this printer is meant for. Now you can print bigger things. You can print, statues. You can print maybe a dragon. You can print whatever you want to print. Now, we typically use Iagu printers. There's a lot of different other printers on the market. At the time, this is what we started with, and we've continued to run with it. It's been pretty reliable for us. We've gone through 3 generations of printers, upgrading along the way to be able to get better features, such as a bigger printer bed, a bigger resin bath, or faster printing time. It's the primary thing that we use to be able to do all of our 3D printing of. These printers range anywhere from $250 to $600. Now that's to get started. Now you can spend a lot more money on these things and get huge beasts of a printer that you can print all the things all at once. And those can range up to $2,000+. Now to get started, it is a bit more of an investment to get an SLA type printer. However, the detail of the miniatures you're going to get out is considerably better than an FDM printer. Now, SLA printers have 2 things that you want to look out for that are going to matter for picking the right one. The first one is, what resolution does it have? Similar to when you pick a TV, what resolution does that TV have? And so printers aren't much different. And really what this is the resolution of the print. The higher the resolution, the more detailed the figure. The other thing to consider is the print plate. So the smaller the print plate, the less you can print on it. The bigger the print plate, the bigger the models are. Now you can slice and cut up the models, miniatures, or whatever it is that you're printing, and you can print them in pieces onto the thing. However, that just adds additional post-processing work where you have to glue together the print or reassemble it in some way somehow. The two types of printers that we would recommend that we've used and tested ourselves is a Mars 3 or 4. These printers are smaller in size, easy to use, and you can print a lot of things. These things are workhorses, and we have put one through the ringer, pretty much printing on it nonstop for about 1.5 years straight with little to no issues. Now, if you're looking for a bigger printer, we also recommend a Saturn II or Saturn III. These are higher definition printers. They have a larger print plate, and you can print a lot of things on it all at the same time. Now, SLA printers work a little bit different, and there are some accessories that you need to get started. For all of these things, we have links down below. One of the things I want to mention about the links is that these are Amazon associate links, and so it doesn't add any extra cost to you to buy through these links, but it does give us a benefit and help support us if you do. So the first thing you're going to need to get is resin. I feel like that's kind of obvious because you need the material to print with, but the reason I'm mentioning is an extra thing is that there's a lot of different types of resin that are out there. These resins are formulated to be able to print higher quality details or lower quality details, depending on which kind you get. They all work pretty well, but if you want to go for extreme detail, then I recommend getting a higher definition resin. The other part of this is I would recommend to start, you match whatever your printer resolution is with the type of resin that you're getting. And I'd also recommend matching brands. The other thing I recommend is using a darker resin, a gray, dark gray, or even a black resin. These are typically easier to work with and match up better with the settings right out of the box. So the next thing you're going to need is a wash station. Now, a wash station is meant to clean off the residue that is left on the prints. The prints themselves are going in and out of a bath, so it's going to have some residue on the outside of it. Now, you're using light to cure the models. So if you leave that resin, the residue on the outside of the models, it's going to cure and you're basically going to end up with a giant blob. So a washing station, you're going to use either water or alcohol, depending on the type of resin that you buy, and you're going to rinse off the residue. So a washing station, what will happen is you can take your models off of the print plate, or you can put the plate itself into the wash station, and it's going to swirl the water or the alcohol around the model and clean all the material off of it. Now, this usually goes for anywhere from 6 to 10 minutes, depending on how big the print is. Now, alternatively, you can do, like I said, and not buy that, and you can put your cleaning solution in a bin and swish it around for the same amount of time. That is going to get exhausting and annoying over time. Now, the key thing with the washing station is if you get a bigger printer, you want a bigger wash station. So it's important that you match those up and pay attention to what you're buying. So curing station is the other thing that you're going to need. And what a curing station is going to do is have a turntable with UV lights, and your model is going to spin around that being cured by the light. It has a timer on it and it'll stop it when it's complete. Now, again, you don't have to buy a curing station. You can instead decide to use a UV light. You could take and use some type of lamp, or you can even put it out in the sun. However, the important thing to do with this is make sure that the model is constantly being rotated or it's moved as it's curing, and you want to make sure that you're not leaving it in and curing it for too long. If you cure the model for too long, you can discolor it, or it can become brittle because of overexposure to UV light. You're going to want gloves. It's really important to protect your hands during this process. The resin itself can agitate your hands. It absorbs into your skin, which is not good, and you're going to get a lot of residue from the cleaning solution that's in there. If we're talking about safety, then that brings us over to the next thing. We recommend getting some type of mask or respirator. I use the word respirator and people instantly freak out. However, there are fumes that are going to come from the 3D print and the resin, and it's also going to come from the alcohol or cleaning solution that you have. Now, we were able to find one that works pretty well that's only around $20. Now, the other good thing is if you're going to do any type of post-processing work or sanding, you also want to have some type of protection for your lungs. So a respirator also helps out really well for that as well. Other thing that you want to consider is getting a funnel with a screen. With your 3D printer, you're likely going to get some paper funnels that have a little mesh screen on the end of them. But what you're going to need a funnel for is from time to time, you have to dump the resin out of the vat back into bottle itself. Maybe you have a failed print, or maybe there is some type of particulates inside the thing. Maybe you have to change some of the screen out. And during this process, you're going to have to dump it out. You want to make sure that you're not putting big pieces into the resin, which could cause damage to your printer later on down the road. The other thing you're going to need is alcohol or water, depending on the type of resin that you're using. Now, there are water-based resins, and those work really well. However, we prefer having a resin that requires you to use alcohol to clean it. Now, there's a couple different types of alcohol you can use, but the recommendation is 99% IPA, or isopropyl alcohol. This is a little less common to be able to get. Some hardware stores carry it, but not all of them do. This solution works pretty well, but one of the side effects of it is stinky. And that's part of the thing that causes a lot of the fumes or the really the stinkiness to come from 3D printing. Now, the other thing that you can do is use denatured alcohol, which works exactly the same way. It is a little bit stinkier. However, it is much easier and cheaper to find. You can pick a gallon up at the local hardware store for relatively cheap. One of the other things you're going to want too is an extra bin. An extra bin to be able to store your alcohol or cleaning solution after it's been used. Now, I'll go into more details about this later, but one of the things that we like to do is pre-rinse our models before putting them into the final clean. This helps preserve our cleaning solution. So having an extra bin that you can put this in, some type of large Tupperware container or bin that has a seal on it that's not going to, that'll prevent your solution from evaporating over time. The last few things we have here are paper towels. Don't go stingy on your paper towels and get the cheapest thing. Get something that's a little higher quality and more absorbent. The last thing on our list is ventilation. So as we mentioned, this is a stinky process. So you don't want this to be in an enclosed space. If you can put this somewhere where it's going to have easy access, where you can vent the room out, you can open a window, maybe it's in a garage or barn, then that is the perfect way to go. It is not a good idea to have these in an enclosed space with no ventilation. Now for ourselves, we have this in a portion of our basement. We have everything blocked off, and we have a vent that can vent out continuously into the outdoors. All right, we've talked a lot about the materials for SLA printing, but now it's time to go ahead and get started for what are the common steps that you need to do for both types of printing. Once you've actually purchased your printer itself, one of your first steps is going to be to set it up. Now these can range from difficult to hard depending on what's required. So be prepared, follow the instructions, and fully assemble the thing according to the instructions. Once you have your printer assembled, the very next thing you need to do is calibrate it. Now this is going to be true whether it's an FDM printer or an SLA printer. There should be instructions included to show you how to do that. For an FDM printer, this typically means leveling the print bed. So for an SLA printer, typically the calibration is taking the print plate and making sure that it's flat onto the printing surface. This usually involves adjusting a couple screws or bolts, and then you'll bring the print to its home position, and then you'll adjust those bolts and screws again. So now that you have your printer set up, you have it calibrated, it's time to print. However, there's a couple more things you're going to need. One, you're going to actually need files to print. Now, this might have been what drew you to printing in the first place, and there's a lot of really good sources that are out there. 3 of my favorite places to be able to find files are Thingiverse, or Thingsverse as people like to say. Now, this is a free site that allows you to search for a wide variety of different things out there. They will provide 3D models that you can use and print. You don't know exactly what kind of quality the print is that you're going to get from these. Sometimes the prints work really well, but this is meant to be a community site where people are just uploading their free models for people to use. Now, a couple other sites that are available, one of my favorite sites to use is My Mini Factory. My Mini Factory is full of a lot of prints that you can purchase. So 3D Cults is another site that's out there, and it works very similar to My Mini Factory. Typically, between those 3 sites, you can find just about anything that you're looking for. Now, alternatively, you can make your own 3D prints if you have some experience with a 3D modeler. A cool website that's out there called Tinkercad, which is a free software that you can sign up for that's in your browser, and you can make 3D objects with it. There's some stock objects that they have, but you can use them to be able to make very simple and common things very easily. And they have a function that you can export it to the file format that you need to be able to do 3D printing. Now, after you have your 3D file, the other thing you're going to need is a slicer. Now, a slicer is needed because really what it does is it takes the 3D model and it creates instructions for your printer. And it doesn't matter what printer it is. If it's an FDM printer or an SLA printer, it's going to create the instructions for it. The good news is that the same 3D model can be used either for an FDM printer or an SLA printer. But as we mentioned before, those printers have different or are better at different things. There are a couple different slicers depending on what type of printer that you have. If you're doing FDM printing, then one of the better ones that I like to use that's free is called Cura. This has a wide range of support and allows you to be able to slice your models and create different profiles for high, medium, and low quality. Easily switch if you want to have supports on your model or not supports on your model. If you're doing SLA printing, there's two different types of software that I would recommend. There's Chitubox, which is a free software that's out there. There's a free version and a pro version. The free version is very simple to easy to use, and you're able to slice your models and add basic supports to them without any problem. The models come out pretty well and it's very user-friendly. Now, the other software that you can use that we would recommend is Lychee. Now, Lychee is a little bit more involved, but provides greater control over the supports that you can put on your printer. If you're using a slicer, the process is going to be very similar. You're going to put your 3D file on there, you're going to put it on the print plate and however it looks, and then you're going to need to determine if you need to have some type of supports for the model itself. FDM printing doesn't necessarily like very sharp angles. So things that are a 90-degree angle that are hanging off the plate are not going to print very well. So one of the things that you can do to solve that is put supports onto the print itself and prevent that from happening. Now, supports are extra material that you're not necessarily going to keep after you're done printing. So you want to consider your model on the print plate to be able to minimize how much support that you actually need on it. SLA printing is a little bit different. Your model is going to be upside down the whole time. It's going to be hanging, meaning that you have to have supports that are going to prevent that model from drooping as it's printing each of the layers. So typically, you are going to have a lot more supports on an SLA print. Now, these supports are going to look like little tiny rods that are going to go and connect to the print. Now, to get started, I would recommend using whatever the printer defaults are for the supports. And then as you go through and get more complex models or you're printing more models, you can evolve to adding your own supports in areas that you know are going to be trouble. Now, once you've put the supports onto the model, you'll end up doing what's called is slicing the model. This is actually the thing in the software that creates the action to generate the file. Once you have the printed file, then you're going to put that on some type of SD card or USB drive, depending on what kind of medium that your printer is willing to accept. And then from there, you can select the print from your 3D printer and actually print the file. Now, I think this is kind of obvious, but I just want to point it out. And depending on what kind of printer you're using, you're going to want to make sure that the material you're using, whether it be filament or resin, is actually in the printer itself. It'd be kind of a shame to have it go through its entire print cycle, but you didn't have any material in there. So make sure you load your material. So some things to watch out when you're printing. There are failures that'll happen when you're 3D printing. Is that these failures happen and your printer continues to print and possibly causing damage to your printer. And so if there is a problem or error, you want to be able to stop it right away. Now, some of the common things that could happen is your print separating from the print plate. Maybe there's an error with the print and it gets damaged or knocked over. Maybe there's an issue with the filament. If you're using the filament where there's a void or something in it, that's causing a problem. With SLA printing, because your print plate is going up and down, if the model actually separates from the print and falls into the bath, and then your print plate is going up and down, then it's likely going to damage the printer itself, which could be really bad. One of the tricks that we do is actually have a camera set up that I can look at any time on my phone or my computer at the printer itself. So after your print is complete, and hopefully it was successful, then there's some post-processing you have to do. For FDM printing, this is where it excels. There's very minimum that you have to do. You simply can take it off the print plate, and there might be some light cleanup work you need to do. The other thing to consider with FDM printing is you can do some post-processing work, having some clippers or a hobby knife nearby to be able to clean up some of the imperfections, go a long way. But one of the things that you might want to do is sand the part. So a couple cautions about that. One, filament in the air is not necessarily a good thing, and it's not something you want in your lungs, so wear a mask and be protected. The other thing is that sanding generates friction onto the part, and friction generates heat. So you want to be cautious about how you're sanding the part. If you do it too much, if you stay in one particular area, if you're having, battery powered or air powered sander, then it's going to be very easy for you to be able to warp or damage your part with heat. So I would recommend, if you're going to sand it, you sand it using your hand with a piece of sandpaper in it. Now, for SLA printing, this is where the pain in the butt part of the process comes in. However, because of the quality of the prints, it is completely worth it. This is where you can get some beautiful prints that just look amazing. So let's take this step by step on exactly what you need to do. The first thing is rinse and wash the print itself. As we mentioned earlier, you're going to have material on a residue on your models themselves. Now, we like to use the pre-rinse method. So what we do is we have a bin that has all of our used wash in it. And then we will take the print plate and swish it around just a little bit to get the bulk of the resin off. Then once we have the bulk of the resin off, we'll then put it into the wash station and then let that go anywhere from 6 to 10 minutes, depending on the complexity. Now, some of the factors that we consider with how long to put it in is depending on if it has, if it's a hollow model, if it has holes, if it has a lot of nooks and crannies, if it's a very condensed print where there's a lot of models right next to each other, we'll do it for longer. Now, the way to be able to tell if your print is clean, once it's completed, if you let it dry for a moment and you look at it and it still has some shiny residue on it, then the print isn't clean and you need to put it in for longer. Now, it could mean that your bath, your wash that you're using, your cleaning solution, is saturated. So it's something that you need to watch and consider while you're doing it. And this is another reason why we do the pre-rinse, because it saves our final washing solution to be good for longer. The solution can get expensive and costly over time, and you don't want it to get cloudy right away. You want the cleaner that your solution is, the crisper that your parts are going to come out as. We leave our prints on the print plate during the washing. However, some people remove them. Either is fine, but we do recommend that you keep it on for the pre-rinse step. One of the reasons we leave ours on the print plate is that when you pull them off, the parts can be slippery if they haven't been cleaned, and you can easily drop them or damage them, which unfortunately we've done, and one of the reasons we've switched to this method. Do not leave your models in the wash for an extended period of time. This will cause the models to absorb whatever the liquid is that it's in, and it can make them cracked, damaged, or completely ruin the model itself. Now, once you've rinsed your parts off, the next step that you want to do is remove the supports. Now, you can remove the supports after you've cured the model. However, this will leave giant pock holes into your prints, which won't look very good, and you might end up wanting to fill those later. You could prevent that by actually removing the supports before you cure it, where the model is a little bit more pliable. Now, you can use clippers to be able to get into some of the tighter spots, or you can simply remove them with your hand. And this is all going to depend on how the supports are put on there, so you have to experiment a little bit with it. Get them. But for now, you can just be careful when you're removing it. Now that the part is clean, the very next step is to actually cure the model. Like we said, we like to use a curing station where it's on a turntable and it has LED lights and the model, or UV lights, sorry, and the model can spin around and the entire thing can be cured. Now, typically we will cure our models anywhere between 6 to 10 minutes. If it's a larger model, we might want to cure it a little bit longer. If it's a smaller model, we might cure it a little less. It all depends on the shape and size of the model. Now, one of the things I want to caution you on before you start curing the model is make sure that it is completely clean. If there's residue still on the model, then that residue is going to cure on the model as well. Now, one of the things you want to be cautious of is not over curing the model. As you mentioned before, this will discolor the model or could cause the model to become brittle. Now, all of this is just to get you started and get you exploring the world of 3D printing. There's a lot more to it, a lot more things that need to be done. Look out for a video that we have coming out in the future for tips and tricks on 3D printing. We'll explain more detail on how we set up our workstation, some things to watch out for, and some tricks to be able to make 3D printing a lot easier. One of the things I want to caution you all on is making sure you start out simple. Start simple and then expand. Try to follow the instructions as close as you can and the prescribed method as close as you can. Then start making small incremental changes. If you try to change everything all at once or start out sprinting when you're barely able to walk, you're going to cause yourself more harm or frustration than you need to. So start simple and then evolve to more complicated. Also a reminder, you don't need to get everything all at once. You can upgrade things over time. One of the things that discourages people the most about 3D printing is the cost to be able to get started. So start simple and then expand. Being safe is one of the most important things. So make sure you wear gloves and wear a mask as needed. So if you have any questions for any of this, if you're looking for other recommendations or you're running into some trouble, put some comments down below and we'll be happy to answer and give you some feedback. So until next time, when we see you at the table.